Welcome back to my channel. I'm EG and this is a Wednesday Reads book review. This week I read the book called The Druid's Portal by Tomamichiel, and I'm sorry if I've pronounced your name incorrectly. So this book was a fantasy story about a woman who was an archaeologist named Janet, and she gets pulled back in time to Roman times. This is Hadrian's Wall era, so right around Newcastle, except it's not actually Newcastle at that time. So she gets pulled back and has to kind of figure out what's going on with the Druids, and there's romance involved, and it's very, very interesting. So this book was sort of your standard get sucked back in time novel with romance in the past and person from the future. So it was interesting. It felt a little familiar because it is a fairly common thing to see, but I think this was a decent interpretation and imagining of that sort of idea, because it involved a lot more of the nitty-gritty, the details in what it was actually like to live in Roman society in England during the time of Hadrian's Wall, and what it was like to be in that place with no technology. And you see the shift from clothing to medicine to what a bathhouse was like. So you see a lot of the historical details represented in that, and I liked that a lot because I like seeing things that are a bit more realistic and maybe not just glossed over for the sake of this is difficult to describe and difficult for people to live through, and we don't necessarily want to scare our readers away. So I liked the fact that it was a bit more historically accurate and more interesting, and I liked the language bits, especially because obviously I am a language nerd. So this had excerpts of Latin, it talked about Celtic, it talked about Ogham, which I also think I might be pronouncing wrong, but I believe it's Ogham, and which was the dialect of the region, and it talked about translations, and I would have liked a little bit more of that, but I realized that I'm a bit weird in that aspect, and not everybody likes to see verb conjugations and translations, and oh golly, this is difficult to understand. So I get that, but it was still interesting to me. I do think it was a little convenient that our main character happened to be fluent in Latin. I mean, I get that she was an archaeologist, but trust me, most archaeologists I have met are not fluent in these dead languages. They can get by with a translation text, but not necessarily fluent, because Latin is a fairly common one to learn, but I mean, it's still difficult to be fluent in it. So that was a little convenient and a little frustrating to be, okay, yes, you're immediately understood because you understand Latin. Oh, okay. Fine. I mean, it makes the story easier to get through, and it definitely moves things along, but it was a little convenient. Overall, though, I think this story was a little bit... It lacked in certain spots. It was a little bit confusing because of the many point of view shifts that happened. You would often shift between Janet and the love interest, Trajan. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but that was a fairly frequent shift, and it didn't seem to happen along chapter lines, which was the part that was confusing. It just sort of happened after a scene, or when they needed another scene or another perspective on that same scene, and so then there was a point of view shift, and that became a little bit confusing because these shifts became sort of really short, and you'd see a few paragraphs from one character and then 3 pages from another, and then a few paragraphs or a few pages or a whole chapter, and it became a little bit confusing, especially halfway through when there was a new character introduced that we saw the point of view from, and I was a little bit like, what? But I mean, on the whole, I could follow the story. I just think the point of view shifts didn't help a whole lot, and if you do that, then I would say chapter boundaries or fewer scenes, perhaps, something not quite so frequent. Otherwise, I think I would have liked to have seen a little bit more dialogue too. These character interactions could have been really interesting, but instead there was a lot of narrative description about what was happening and what the characters were talking about, and I think I would have liked to have seen that broken out and stretched out into the dialogue and character interactions as opposed to the narrator describing these actions. So that made it feel a little bit flat, and it was a little bit tedious to get through some of the narrative descriptions, but again, on the whole, I think it was a good interpretation of the person from the future gets pulled back through time. I think it was an interesting story, and I definitely liked the romance. I wish that would have been a bit more difficult, maybe. I like seeing a bit more conflict in my romance, to say, yes, I don't know you, but what's going on and why didn't I believe you? But I mean, that's besides the point. That was not actually necessary at all. I think this romance was done very nicely. It was very cute. So very cute. On the whole, I think this is a decent book. I would say if you're interested in fantasy romance where you have a main character who is pulled back through time due to forces she cannot stop, and she has to then go solve a problem, hopefully with some help from the past, and oh, by the way, he's very, very interesting to look at and to talk with, then alright. This is probably a good book for you. Just be aware of the point of view shifts and that there is a bit more narrative than there is dialogue. But on the whole, I think it was a good book, and if you're interested in reading more about this or finding it or seeing any other of Cindy's books, because she has rather a few, do go look in the links below in the description box. Have a look at those. Go check her out on social media and go and read this book. So that's all I've got for you today. This was The Druid's Portal, which the cover, by the way, is really, really beautiful. So The Druid's Portal by Cindy Tomamichiel. If you're interested, go check it out, and I will see you next time.